Welcome, everybody. This is the Virtual Residency 2025 workshop. It's our 11th annual workshop, and this is Friday, June 27th, 2025. It's our final day and our next to final session for the workshop. Our panel is Emerging Technologies. Our moderator is Jose Hernandez, and I'm going to turn the show over to Jose to introduce the panel.
Hello everyone. My name's Jose Hernandez. I work at Florida State University. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. We have a great panel assembled today to talk about emerging technologies in research computing and how they're integrated. I'll go ahead and let each of the panelists introduce themselves for a couple minutes, and then we'll get started with a couple questions that we assembled together. And if we have, obviously, we'll have time, we'll move to questions from the audience. Sound good to everyone? All good? Okay, so I'm just gonna go through alphabetic order in the back. I don't want to pick people for starting their intro. So go ahead, let me see. B's, yeah, Mr. Borden, Dr. Borden, go ahead. We'll start with your intro there.
All right, well, I'm Phil Boarding. I'm a professor in electrical engineering and computer science at Alabama A&M University. I've worked in the university environment for the last 20 years or so. But prior to that, I worked in industry and high performance computing centers. I worked for IBM at Vicksburg. I worked for the NASA Goddard as a contractor and was responsible for installing a huge supercomputer in 2000 and worked there for 5 years. I specialize in algorithms and hardware and novel architectures. I just went to two quantum workshops, one at Rice University, and that was quite interesting. And then I am how can I say it? I'm an advocate of algorithms and hardware, and IEEE had a workshop on field programmable gate arrays. So we'll discuss some of that during the meeting today. And the challenge, I think, for this group of people that are doing research with computers, I think the challenge right now is that the quantum folks think that the number of qubits that they will have working, they're on the order of 100 to 1,000 now, although you can do some experiments with two or three or 10, but they claim that in 5 years, 2030, they will have machines with 1 million qubits. So the challenge in the research community is what problem could we solve with 1 million qubits? How accurate would it be? Would it get the right answer even? Any rate, those are emerging technologies, and I think we'll have an interesting discussion this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Borden. Next, go ahead, Dr. Cheng. You can introduce yourself and elaborate more. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Josie Chang. I'm with the professor at the information system at the University of Central Oklahoma, and worked in the industry like field 20 years designing software for Fortune 500 companies, and then I joined UCO and been working there 24 hours, years. And so I'm also an NSF grantees and review a lot of panels and grant proposals. And so I'm going to share a few NS Grant Awards today. And so I look forward to learning from everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Next up, Dr. Freeman. Go ahead and take it off.
Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Freeman. I'm the senior research computing and facilitator here at Harvard University in the University of Research Computing. My background, I have a PhD in virology, so I grew up in the life science area and sort of hopped back and forth between doing research and research computing over the last 30 years or so. I was also one of the early members on the ground floor for the ACIRF project, which is now blossomed into what is now CARC, the Campus Research Computing Consortium, where I co-coordinate the People Network with my colleague Lauren Michael. I'm also on the logistics operational group, the sort of team lead for the metrics group, and I'm also on the transitional board as we start our foray to become a nonprofit. Most of my time now is spent working with researchers as they transition to our regulated data environment. But I've sort of worked across the board for from large systems here on campus through and those through Access and Exceed. Our current work is completely on AWS, so I have very interesting perspective of helping researchers trying to leverage cloud computing and a number of the advanced technologies there as well, which we can talk about. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. So go ahead, Dr. Quarterman. Let us know.
Yes, good morning, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks for joining us. So my background, really, I started as an educator and did a lot of work in math education with school districts and began to do a lot of work with professional development for teachers with an organization that focused on visible learning and computational sciences specifically. Um, I've spent the bulk of my career just connecting strategic partnerships, philanthropic wings of organizations for outcomes in ed tech, outcomes for students, specifically in K-12. So right now, I'm also a PhD student at Meharry School of Applied Computational Sciences, where data science is my major. So I'm so excited to see all the inroads that we're seeing in emerging tech and data science specifically. I also do consulting in several data science initiatives across the country. So I'm just excited to be here for this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Quarterman. And Dr. Weber, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Keith Weber. I'm the GIS director here at Idaho State University. I've been here for about 27 years. Time flies, right? When you're having fun, or at least when you're busy. Um, my background is in wildlife and ecology, environmental science, and obviously what I'm doing is I'm studying habitat. I'm studying the landscape using GIS and a lot of remote sensing. A lot of my research program has been funded a lot by NASA. I have a lot of good colleagues at NASA, worked with them for a number of decades. And I do a little bit of teaching. Um, and yeah, happy to be part of this panel.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. And then let me go ahead and introduce myself as well and what I do, even though I won't be partaking in the discussion. As I said, my name is Jose Hernandez. I work at Florida State University on our Research Computing Center. I'm the Digital Humanities Technology Specialist, which means I help mostly academics in the humanities, social sciences, and the arts to interact with emerging tech. So in that, we really group any and all tech, right? And then I mostly work in quantum humanities, incorporating quantum computing for music work and for quantum computing education, with some AI stuff, but mostly quantum in the humanities. All right, so that's my background. In terms of going forwards, thank you everybody for introducing yourselves. Hopefully, we'll have a great panel today and a great discussion. I'm gonna just posture a question to everybody. Feel free to jump in anytime and to try to elaborate on each other's work, but also what you're doing. The main question would be, what do you think are the nearest, like the near term emerging technologies that we should keep a look on in research computing? And who are you seeing using this? Like which departments, which research domains, right? So that's a two-pronged question. What are the near-term emerging techs you're seeing, and what research domains are they being used in? Okay. I know we're gonna most likely get away with this. So hopefully I won't have to ask anything again, and we can just float by on how this discussion goes. Okay. And now on to the awkward silence that happens once the question gets done. Okay. So let me know.
Well, when we were preparing for this panel, there was a lot of email discussion behind the scenes that a lot of the participants attending today don't know about. And so we could certainly rehash some of those things. We ended up with this really large list of what we felt were the emerging, yeah, technologies. And of course, everyone contributed to that list based on their own experience, their field, because what they're seeing in their field, and I'm guilty of it. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing. We know our own field better than we know someone else's field. So what I had suggested there are a few things that you're seeing up on the screen right now. The Internet of Things, the high resolution imagery, and I'm not talking just high spatial resolution imagery, but high temporal resolution imagery. I also had put in obviously artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning algorithms to analyze that imagery. And there's a connectivity between these things. The Internet of Things, those cameras that are out and about everywhere, part of the Internet of Things that I deal with, the imagery, the video that comes into that, analyzing that rapidly enough in real time or near real time type of analysis. Um, Oftentimes require it doesn't have to be artificial intelligence classifications. I'll actually call that currently in my field for classification, feature extraction. I see artificial intelligence as an emerging technology, yes, but an immature technology at this time. Makes tremendous number of mistakes. But I said the same thing over a decade ago about drones and UAVs, UASs, about 15 or so years ago. That was in its infancy. And of course, look where it is right now. So that's my little bit here. And maybe someone else can go ahead and answer that question that Jose had posed to all of us.
Sure, I'll jump in here. So I think that as humans, we're much better at inventing technology than understanding the best practice for usage necessarily. So, as Dr. Weber wisely said, we all come from our own content area, our own expertise. Mine is certainly in the education space. Some of the emerging technologies that we've seen specifically in K-16 are gaming, are virtual reality usage. We see usage of certainly generative AI, more usage of LLM. We see a lot of ed tech companies that have been tremendously successful with personalized tutors. We see that on the rise more than ever. But understanding really because the space of emerging technologies and AI is usually far ahead of education. We're kind of playing a little bit of a catch-up game with that. So there's a balance in usage and also making sure that we're informed. And of course, with K-12, one of the most important questions to ask is, why was this technology designed? So there's a lot on the table. There's also quite a few AI literacy frameworks that have been put out there in the last 12 months. And so those heavily engage emerging technologies as well. So there is a robust collaborative discussion. There's no one that knows it all, but we are all engaged. And so we're watching to see the needle move.
I just jumped in here right after the K-12. A lot of my NSF grants focus on high school students to prepare for future workforce and before they go to college. And so I base a lot of my research using the United Nations 2030 sustainable models for interdisciplinary applications and to broaden the global society impacts. And so, as you can see, they have 17 goals here for the UN 2030. And so we form a lot of partnership. And I mentioned earlier, we work in IT industry 20 years. So we partner with a lot of, for the industries, IBM, Apple, and so forth. And then some of the government sectors, such as the FBI, and in Oklahoma, we have the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation across the UCO campus. And so we also have AppScored and then OCAST. And so some of you probably are familiar in Oklahoma. And one of the grant that's focused on high school girls, because we are turning away a lot of female students who are interested in pursuing finding more about forensics. And so this grant focuses on computer forensics, and we use a lot of technology such as a blockchain, AI, machine learning, and virtual reality and simulation, so forth, to immerse students, girls, to role playing, and they can see as they grow up, they can actually become one of those professionals. And some of those uh, we use the blockchain for the DNA, and that way they can students can learn to code a little bit with blockchain and see the interface and how they store those hybrid data, such as the DNA forensic. And so we also use a lot of the database like the coders and uh, faces, and to those are the relational database, but store those hybrid, more complicated data than just the regular text and numbers. And so another next grant that's funded is because we're in Oklahoma, home to 39 United tribal nations. So this grant is just currently funded is to prepare the tribal educators, and also the homeschoolers are on the rise as well. And so we target that to provide different type of education. And working with tribes, we were very aware of their poverty issues and hunger. A lot of one and fourth population, they live below poverty. So that's 25%. And so this is just trying to give them the tools and um, train their students, their teachers, that way they can pursue some of the higher paying jobs, such as computer science and other interdisciplinary disciplines. That way they be able to come back and help their own communities with needs. And this is another project that collaborate with the EPA award and then the App Store with Dr. Kevin Wagner. And so we have also focused on some of the tiers as you saw earlier with the model of biodiversity and land and clean water and so forth. And so that's a lot of those grants that will result in a lot of innovations and then knowledge transfer from grant to grant. And we try to leverage that. And then you can have a lot of the technology, classroom teaching, and some of the journals and dissemination and so forth. So the tools, the goal is in the future, we're going to have a lot of AI agents. And earlier, a lot of our participants mentioned about in the future what would be like. So AI could be used for as a teaching assistant, because a career, as a tutor. I'll try to optimize our productivity. And then some of those contents is generated by AI. And so we also want to challenge our students, not just using the uh, generative AI, but also to promote their computational skills as one of the MIT, Harvard, Bob will probably familiar with that. And a lot of the research showing what AI impedes the development of computational thinking skills. And so that's some of the things that we want to help make sure our students and our teachers, educators that know that how to use them in a classroom, in their research, and their community service, and so forth. And so we cannot really talk about AI without talking about the ethical considerations. So I'm sure this will come up. And so I just going to end. And one of the tools is Fathom. Then we could actually plug in for this residence or any kind of a project management meetings that you could actually take notes and enhance your productivity. So I'm just going to end here. And for the next person who wants to share.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chen. You actually gave us a great segue to our next topic of discussion, right? We talked about different emerging technologies and we talked the domains that we're all in and we're using them for. I did want to talk particularly about that part of the divide, right? When we have these education initiatives is because we're seeing groups staying away from emerging technologies or we're not doing a good job of including them into how we teach with these emerging technologies or how we use them in research computing. So I wanted to ask of our panelists, how are you broaching that, right? What barriers have you seen for adoption, and how are your research computing centers, or whatever group you're in, solving this out? And we already saw a little bit of that in the into education presenter. So we'll go ahead and take it away.
Well, I can go first again. I don't always have to go first, but I will in this instance. Um, Couple of things. There are a lot of students that I meet that think when I do it, the introduction to high performance computing, supercomputing in one of my um, upper level classes, it's very apparent that a lot of students think, wow, that stuff I'll never be able to touch that. I'll never be able to understand that, and they're just ready to walk away and continue their work with Windows desktop and maybe the Mac desktop, those sorts of things. They think it's beyond their reach or their comprehension. But then when I get them, a few who are interested, to actually get involved and they're not so scared of command line, that's a big barrier, by the way. Command line scares people like crazy, you know? But then when they see how it's not really that hard, and see how fast it can do something for you, they do it a few times. They feel pretty comfortable with it. So that I would say is a really big barrier. The potential of it, of course, if we can teach this to so many students and we can get them interested in this is good. I mean, processing something quickly that needs to be processed quickly. Phil was sharing some real world anecdotes, observations about that. I've seen the same thing. I do a lot of my research, lens cover change type of things with wildfire, satellite imagery, and time is of the essence in a disaster scenario. So folks who know how to do this can do it, can then kind of push the envelope when some of us end up retiring in not too distant futures, right? I think that's important. I did want to throw out, and Josie already mentioned this too, what is its potential? We always think of a potential as better and better and better improvements across the board. But one of the potentials I really think, and I stress this to all of my students, is those ethical privacy considerations, because what we're seeing in today's world, um, especially what I'm seeing, the very high resolution spatial data, spatial imagery, all these sorts of things that we're able to do, we might, yeah, we might be stepping on those ethical or crossing the line of ethical considerations. And I think that one of the things I tell my students is if you ever think that spatial data that you're going to use, you're going to be looking at, you're going to be analyzing for whoever is asking for it, if you ever think that that violates the Fourth Amendment to the Bill of Rights, that's all about privacy, then you shouldn't be doing it. So we can't lose sight of that. I know the technology is so cool. Wow, look, I can't believe it. But that is a potential we cannot gloss over.
I'm going to jump in here, mostly because there's a couple of things that have been brought up that I really want to touch on, that I do have a few few things that I could comment on. I think one of the things that I will first address the question on, the have and have-nots and providing access. I think that's an incredible question and incredible problem. It's great to hear all the other panel members addressing parts of that. Here, certainly at Harvard, as many of you know, we're kind of under the microscope right now. One of the things that's a little unique for the work that I do and the work that our group does is providing access to groups across the university for regulated data. And so, sorry, providing compute access or an environment like a secure enclave for those who need to do analysis or research on secure data. And sort of stepping back and thinking about this a moment, this is a very different change than what many of us used to have to deal with, even a year or 2 years ago. We're seeing a flood of people coming to our environment simply because the rules have changed and the game has changed from the federal government. And so one of the things I'd sort of like to posit is this not necessarily emerging technologies, but it's sort of the ecosystem of what is happening around us that is driving us to use emerging ecosystems, if you will. And I think that this need for regulated data environments, secure enclaves, and secure systems will become increasingly important with the advent of quantum computing and AI and these sorts of things, because I think that the threats will be that much more significant. And I think that the ethics, because of just the sheer computing capabilities that will be at our fingertips, and we're already seeing this today. And I think that sort of starts to play into the ethics also of, can we do this? Should we be doing this? And what are the concerns around this, and making sure that we have a robust program in place to highlight these concerns to students, especially students. Mostly, and for those that aren't aware, the adult brain continues to evolve until about, I think, 25 years old.
Yes.
Courtney, Josie, you guys could speak to this directly. So, during their teen and late teen years in college, they're still trying to figure this out, and they need guardrails. And so it's an important thing for us to be able to help them with that. I'm going to share in the chat, if I can, this great, and it still is just an amazing moment. We had an IT summit here at Harvard, and this is the last thing I'll share here. Comment on. We had this amazing IT summit here about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Michael Smith, who's the dean of the engineering school, gave this really thought-provoking talk on the use of AI in the classroom and teaching ethics. And the slide, I happened to be in the upper level. I got in late, and here he was talking about using AI, for teaching. And my spouse is a school teacher, public schools, and of course it's a big issue in the public school system as well. And he started the talk with this slide of some Unix code and said, "What is this?" And I've been doing Unix stuff for about 10, 20, 30 years. And I got all the way to the last part. I had no idea what the last line is. And I'm like, he's picking part. And sure enough, it's spell checking. This is how you spell checked in Unix, many moons ago. And it's just picking apart a sentence, finding the things that weren't in a dictionary, etc. And he said, "So what do we do now with ChatGPT?" And you just say, "Please spell check this thing." And it came back and said, "Oh, your document is fine, but here are some other suggestions for grammar." And so we're supposed to take it at face value that it's correct. So he basically prompted ChatGPT the same exact pieces of code that were in the Unix. Please pick apart the sentences, remove the punctuation, and basically came back that ChatGPT on one iteration basically said, "Oh, there were 42 misspellings." And then trying to determine if it was deterministic, if it was reliable, he did it again. And this time there were 28. Like, how could there be a change in misspellings? And so by using some of the tools of putting up some of the guardrails and putting some of the tests around it, he could figure out where the gaps were in the technology, and then was so bold as to go on to say, well, my course, ethics course, after spring break, the students get a little tired. They've done it before, so they fall asleep or they don't show up. So ChatGPT, or the AI, trying to help us be creative, he said, hey, ChatGPT, how can I make my course more engaging? And came back with some ideas. So he then went back and, basically, knowing these problems in this slide with ChatGPT, used the pros of this tool and basically put guardrails so you couldn't veer into the challenges or the problems. And so, thereby leveraging all the gains or the great capabilities for the tool, and keeping people out of the danger areas. And I thought it was a really interesting way to approach, that as sort of these emerging technologies, and also sort of the ethics around what's okay and what's not okay, where, and the pitfalls. And so, to me, it was a sort of a great lesson, if you will, of here's a possible blueprint how we might approach using these technologies to address some of the ethics, and especially, to go back to the original question, is making sure that we're enabling all the persons to use these technologies, not just the ones who have advantages or special knowledge.
Bob, this is Phil Boarding. Item 3 on the left side of your slide that you put up there, it drives the student's cognitive interest to 0.
Yeah,
That's absolutely true.
yeah, yeah.
And
It's
I've
it's
taught
been
a
coming out in
course
the
in
news.
Linux.
Yeah,
I taught a course in Linux last fall at the university. And halfway through the semester, I got so tired of the students looking at the screen and their phones, I instituted you're going to think it's nuts. I instituted a process where I brought a list of 10 questions to class. And after lecturing for a few minutes, I would ask the question and answer it. It was not a quiz. Okay? I would ask the question and answer it, and I would make the students write it down in cursive or print, I don't care, on a piece of paper. And at the end of the class that day, they had to turn that piece of paper back into me. All right? And the issue is, if you look at a phone or a screen and study something, you have about a 20% retention rate. But if you make it go through your eyeballs, into your brain, into that neural net thing we call the human brain, and come out your fingertips and you write it down, you have a 60 or 70% retention rate. So the question is, given this graphic environment that we have in front of the students' eyes today, do we want to drive their learning rate to 20%, or do we want to keep it back up at the 60 to 70% rate? And it's a
yeah.
very interesting technology challenge.
Yeah. Phil, it's great to hear you say this, because I would love to, hear if the other panelists can back this up, because I also heard about this study that the act of the motor skill of writing, listening, ingesting, processing, writing, results in increased learning and increased retention. I would love to actually go back and see the literature on that, because I've heard that before, and I certainly transitioning from
Well,
written to
I have
electronic
evidence
too.
because
Yeah.
their test scores went up. Their answers to
Yeah.
questions later was greatly improved. I'm not interested in a 5% improvement in anything. I'm
Yeah.
interested in an integer multiple improvement.
Yeah.
I want to see a 3-time or a 10-time or a 60-time improvement in something. Okay? Thank
Yeah, I, I can jump in as well. I believe we were, I'm going to actually pivot back to the question about just addressing the great divide. so to speak, Jose, as you mentioned, and thank you, Bob. That was very insightful. I mean, I love that discussion. I would have given anything to have been a fly on the wall in that room to hear that. So that's exciting. I'm going to dig into that later. But I spent a lot of my career even connecting the philanthropic wing of organizations to schools. Um, as I said, focus on many data science initiatives right now. One of them being even with the Atlanta University system, HBCUs, we're certainly concerned about advocating, and that's a big initiative where we want to see more students involved in that. I also founded a group called the Sister Circle Collaborative, focused on minority women in STEM and CS and AI. And that particular network is so needed because, as was mentioned already, we do see a need to really bridge the gap for underrepresented communities. I mean, it's just what it is. It's still there. And the other part is that, how to even bridge that gap. How do we do that? That really is a question because the cost becomes an issue, the access to different tools becomes an issue. I firmly believe that really pulling in the net more tightly with corporate partnerships and sponsorships is critical. I've seen, when you talk about outcomes, the best outcomes I've seen have been with high engagement in students when it comes to that triangulation of student engagement, education engagement, and also that corporate partner engagement as well. Actually getting them in the schools, actually helping them iterate on the design, and actually being a mentor to those teachers as well. So that's a space that I've had a chance to spend a lot of time with. But it's a lot of work to do when it comes to bridging that divide, when it comes to accessibility and making students have access. It's concerning as well because as we see all these tools be introduced in the classroom, it's often the districts that are a little bit more prominent that have all the best tools, that have all the bells and whistles, that have all of that. So it's something to keep our eyes on. Open access resources, grant funded resources have been a good solution. A lot of companies have forked out millions to just make that happen for students. But eyeballs on the outcomes is the key. And so we're all kind of watching the needle. I don't think anyone has a corner on what's going to be completely the best practice on that, but we're all watching to see kind of what happens with that. But certainly a community and collaborative approach is critical, especially with all the new ed tech and emerging technologies.
This was great. Thank you all for that particularly very riveting discussion on education. That was great, and on how we can bridge that great divide. Thank you. Thank you all for that. I'm gonna pivot now just because of time to most of our audience, right? We're more in the research computing space, and a lot of them are not full-on educators, right? So the question I want to posit here is how can research computing facilitators or people whose main job is to help with research help students get with emerging tech, right? So how do those organizations that sometimes fall outside the academic spectrum, how can they bridge over and help out on the academic space? And this may go long on this one, but I just want to make sure that we get to the core of our audience that is here.
Well, Jose, I'll take a stab at this one. Um, I in my Linux class that I discussed a little while ago, we had a week or so of discussing what kind of computer architectures Linux runs on. And it goes all the way from a Raspberry Pi to very, very large supercomputers. And um, the issue is that there are many advanced technologies that are emerging, like quantum computing, for instance, that doesn't run Linux. I mean, the interface to the quantum environment might be Linux, but the quantum machine's not running Linux. There's no operating system there. You pose a problem, you set up some sort of interconnection process, and then you try and solve it. And the other emerging technologies, if we could go back to that slide in the beginning that somebody had a list, I think it was Josie, maybe had a list of emerging technologies. There was
I'll go ahead and
it had
check.
photonics and it had quantum. There was one missing, in my opinion. And if you yeah, this is the one. Um, after let's say after quantum computing, put in memristors. MEMRISTER, memristors computing. And memristors are a current-driven resistor memory device that can be used to build neural networks. Okay? So photonic computing is you can buy devices that do photonic computing. You can buy devices that do memristor computing, and you can build. Well, with photonics, you can do some limited accuracy floating point arithmetic. With memristors, you can build things that look like memory cells, and you can build some sort of neural net. With FPGAs and the FPGA units, some come with a computer already built in, and you're adding instructions to a von Neumann style computer. And other FPGAs, you're creating a whole new computing environment that might be completely different. I built an FPGA machine that ran the wave equation in hardware. Okay, and so you had multiple parallel units communicating with each other, and the data flowed from memory for the cubes of data through the FPGAs and then back into the to memory cubes. Uh, so there's a number of how can I say it, soldering iron kind of techniques that can be used to build computing devices, and then there's a number of hardware-oriented things that you can get. Now, the university I work at got a very large GPU machine and made one mistake, and you have to be very careful. We had an air-cooled machine instead of a water-cooled machine, so we now had a fairly large room with a fairly expensive computer in it that no one could be in to work in because it was so noisy. So you can make operational mistakes too when you get some sort of a technology environment. Yeah. Um, but I think that, how can I say it? We have more and more handheld devices and more devices in the house and in in the business environment that have some sort of quote intelligence. And part of this emerging technology is where are these devices going and what will they be used for and how do you build them and what can the human mind invent with a tensor processing unit or a quantum processor and how they would use it for something. Um, anyway, I'll stop there.
You're good. Do you th I'm actually gonna follow up on a question to this one. Um, for example, when we teach parallel programming, right, we teach students how to think in a parallel way most of the time. That transition is not easy for a lot of students to think in ways to program parallelly. Do we think this may be for any panelist, but really, Dr. Borden, do we think that for these
I
new
would,
technologies,
if you
quantum
want to get
and
students to
others?
teach to think in parallel, I would do a series of experiments. The most obvious mathematical processes. Um, let's take linear algebra for instance. Uh, Factoring an equation, um, doing a million. Most students do linear algebra in class. They do a 6 by 6 matrix. But if you build a finite element model of an airplane wing to do the stress analysis, you have millions of degrees of freedom. All right. And so getting them to
I was
use,
gonna ask. I was gonna ask for everybody. I know the parallel way is. I'm thinking, do we have to teach students new ways to think with the other emerging techs that are on here, especially for Internet of Things? high resolution memory, other stuff that is not, parallel computing. I know most of us work in that space. So I just want to get to what types of thinking do we need to teach differently for the other ones?
Well,
Jose, I would say we simply need to encourage our students to actually think. That's that critical thinking we've been kind of talking about in the chat line. Because what I'm seeing, unfortunately,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, I teach this when I teach this certain class that it's information technology for GIS. Okay, and it's designed to meet once a week so non-traditional students who are out in the workplace can attend. And so it's like a 3 hour block of time. And I used to frequently, I'd be like running out of time. Ah, geez, I'm running out of time, running out of time. And so I would adjust my syllabus. And the reason why I was running out of time years ago with essentially the same, basic concepts I'm teaching, I was running out of time because there's so much discussion. Students would ask these questions. They didn't really understand it. They wanted more details, or they would question me, is that right? Can you explain that even more? Can you cite some of that? Oh yeah, I was all ready. I was having a good time. But now, last couple years, I'm like, wow, we're done and we got 20 minutes. Go ahead and start working on the homework while you're here. And so they won't even challenge me. I was actually thinking I was going to purposely put in some fake information and just see if anyone would ask. And I'd say, come on, guys, I made that whole thing up a minute ago. We need that. We need to encourage students. It doesn't hurt my feelings to question me. It's a great discussion. I think we really need to instill that, encourage that.
I have to applaud you, Keith, for doing that because sometimes the high school kids coming to the college is so used to spoon feeding. And
Yes.
then now all of a sudden, instead of the knowledge acquisition, we're going to have challenged them to think outside the box, what's relevant to their lives, and what can those technology take us to the next frontier. So I think in a way we are going to be experiencing that type of transformative education is first to experience that paradigm shift as a faculties, as a educators. And so we need to transparent show them, you know, you have a point there. And so to be able to engage your students to run out of the class time, that is definitely a blabble, on your part, to do that. My 2 cents. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll also jump in here too, because you did ask about facilitation, and that's something I've been doing now for the last 10 to 12 years. And I think it's a very interesting question that you posed about facilitating students and working with researchers and then taking that into the academic classroom, because I think that there's a very different approach on how research and research approaches are used in teaching and learning, depending on which discipline you're in. I've noticed in digital humanities and social sciences, perhaps, that the teaching and the research are hand in hand, that the students actually do help the faculty with the research as a part of the academic curriculum. That's not the case in the life sciences, and I have a feeling it's probably not the case in the natural sciences in general, that the teaching and the research and the teaching and learning are very, very separate. And so the research informs the teaching, but the classes and the people in the classes are not doing that. And so there is a very different way to approach it. That being said, I will say that I think, as all the panelists have alluded to, critical thinking and learning are an incredible part of this process. And as a facilitator, and it's funny, on a panel like this last year, I brought up the crisis in teaching or helping researchers with skills training classes for using research computing capabilities, because of the fact that people, researchers, and I was at Harvard Business School at the time, but it was echoed across the on behalf of many of the panelists. the researchers would just Google stuff and then try it, had no idea whether it would work or not. And then they would send in questions that were clearly documented. People wouldn't show up to trainings, like all the typical vehicles, that we would use for training, where we had to throw out the window. And I think it's sort of the TikTok social media. I've got 2 minutes. You're only going to get 30 seconds of my attention, and if you don't grab me, I'm gone. And so I think that there's we. I'm not really sure what to say, except I think we're going to have to keep trying new methods. But I think at the same time, one of the most important things I think that I'm at least trying to do is what we call the engagement interview, or is when students or researchers get accounts, or when you first meet with them, establish a connection, build trust. What are you trying to do? What's your background? Where are you having problems? Where can I help? And then, what is your goal, and how can we help align your approach with using the resources? And I think that's going to be true no matter what discipline you're in and whatever the research approach is. And building that connection, I think, is really important.
Thank you so much. Now we have like the last 15 minutes. I do want to turn it over if we have any questions from the audience, particularly for the last few points of research facilitation, and how can we incorporate this in. I'm gonna wait about a few minutes to see if we have any questions popping in the chat. If not, we can keep this. I'm sure we can keep this discussion rolling for a while. Not, but I want to see if we have anybody with any pressing questions in the chat.
If nothing comes up in the chat line, here's something else I'll throw out that I think we need to consider also is that these very large data centers, they consume a lot of energy. What's that role? How's that all fit in? The energy demands of these data centers, kind of, is it worth it? That sort of thing. What do folks think? Do folks know that I think it's Microsoft that is actually building a nuclear reactor funded entirely to support
Yeah.
their data center? So we're not talking small beans that they're just, they need a little bit more power coming into their place. This is tremendous.
My son works at a Google computing center as an electrician, and they have a how can I say it? A trash can a day full of disks that have expired, which they grind up. So that tells you how big this place is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe some of that stuff will stimulate other questions from our participants. Any of these things that we've talked about.
I
Or
think that
any follow-ups from comments too. Yeah. Sorry, Josie,
Mhm.
go ahead.
no worry. Another challenge would be water resources. In order to have data center, you kind of have to cool your servers, and and so that's another part. And I was born in Taiwan, so I'm kind of keep up with the Taiwan semiconductor. And Taiwan's a small island, so if they figure out a way to recycle their water when they're making their chips, and so that's another areas like, okay, how sustainable are those ecosystems, including the data center, including what other ways to sustain even on broader spectrum of global society. And so, yeah, Keith, you raised up excellent questions, and so I don't know the answers, but I do think that there are ways that we need to figure it out.
Mm.
How sustainable can we be for the
Well,
future?
one of the questions is some of these algorithms that quote run on a GPU, you have to ask if they're an equivalent algorithm that would run with a far lower power consumption. And now it's not how do I get an algorithm with a better memory footprint. Now it's how do I get a better solution technique with a power footprint? What's the power consumption? Okay.
Well, I'm curious. I have heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, about ARM GPUs, and
Mm.
I don't know what the power consumption contrast is there. I mean, I hope they hold good promise. But yeah, do we really need to run it on the GPU? And of course, everybody thinks, oh, I need 20 GPUs. So, I mean, that's another problem, over asking, over provisioning.
Yes, and in some of my research, we're also working on a project looking at three different of the UN sustainability goals. Dr. Ching,
Mm.
I was glad to see you put that up there. But I think the short of it is everyone is still grappling with that. I mean, that's, the sustainability. There's so much focus on it. It is a robust collaborative discussion, thankfully, lots of university involvement. Our team, that's something that we talk about regularly, and there's no short answer.
Well, what do you think a million qubit power requirement is going to be to get something that big, that small, that cold, you know? That's going to be an interesting challenge right there.
Well, the good thing is you can't hide it.
So this is interesting. We've talked about emerging technologies. We see these actually very exciting and intriguing emerging technologies. There's no doubt about that. But what we're also seeing is all of this emerging technologies has to be tempered with concerns of energy demands, concerns of ethics and privacy issues, um, and at the same time, to properly or effectively leverage these emerging technologies, we need not just skilled people, we need smart people, people who are
Thinking
really going to
people.
think about this. And we're going to, we need to have that next generation. I know. We always look at the next generation. I think we're doing pretty good in this generation, but we need to prep that next generation so that they can go beyond what we're doing easily. That's what we want. That's what I want. So that now we got these wonderful emerging technologies, but we've got these considerations, these other hurdles we have to cross. We can do a lot with technology, no doubt, but I've always seen there's lots of things we need to do on the people side too.
Talking about what can we do on the people side, do you think that for those who work in research computing centers or work right now in academia, what would be the solution for them? Like to do research on this? Would it be to talk about it when they're designing their new rack edition? We're thinking about switching to water cooled. What steps can they take, if any, to think
Well,
about these in a more practical way?
I think always a very holistic approach has to be taken to these. We can push for the technology, and some of us we'd focus in so much. I want that technology, and we'd forget about these other considerations. So that's important. And also what you had asked us before, Jose, about the facilitators. This come back into play now too, because I'm thinking. Um, a lot of this is about communication. Communication is the transfer of information, not just the transfer of data. Okay. So I've got quite a bit of experience working with decision makers, congressmen, and legislators, and you name it. When we talk about disaster preparedness and post wildfire, all these good things like this that I've been working on. Um, and what I noticed is I can make a big mistake by not properly communicating what they need to know, really answering their question. If there's too much of our jargon that gets thrown into it, too much science, we talk about p-values and they're like, "Oh, whatever." They're not stupid people, but they have a different field. So right on down the line, every step of the way, including our research facilitators, need to communicate, the important parts, the actionable information to that person, whoever they're talking to. It could be a researcher in, my field, satellite remote sensing and GIS, or it could be me trying to talk to young students coming up. That's important. There was a person years ago, Dr. Ironside, who always said, and it stuck with me, put the cookies on the bottom shelf so it's easy for the kids to get them, right? And you know the analogy with that, right? Cookies are what we're teaching.
Given that we have the last 7 to 10 minutes, do we want to do any wrap up comments from? I know Keith kind of summarized what we've been doing there for a while, so I think we're in a good footing here to re-transition to this. If anybody has any last comments about emerging tech in research computing, go ahead. Or research computing education, because I think that's the tack we took, and I'm very happy we took it because that's a very needed conversation for us, right? We know how to do intakes and we know how to deal with researchers, although we're tried hard every day, right, to come up with new solutions about this, but educating about it can be a huge struggle. So, any last comments there to wrap it up? Okay.
Well, if folks would like, I've already given my summary. Maybe we just go around. If Josie and then Phil or whatever would like to do a minute or two summary, if you like to, that might be fun. Or not.
Really putting people on the spot, Keith.
To recap, we thought Henry did a great job. Just kidding. But I think that's a lot of challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, I think we're always going to have new technologies. I mean, that's what we do as humans. We're always inventing things. There's always tools, and there always is that tool-centric focus. But I think where it's going to be effective or not, or a benefit or not, really depends on what we do to where we focus. Are we going to focus on the tool, or are we going to focus on the appropriate use of the tool? And I think and or maybe it's not even appropriate. It's what's appropriate for some may not be appropriate for others. So what are the pros and cons, and how do you approach, what is the appropriate use?
Well, there's always this short-term vision of where we can do things next,
Mm,
and the longer-term vision of a problem that needs to be solved. And the
yeah.
classic example is the complexity of the human genome. If we're going to use techniques to search for new drugs, um, uh, the how can I say it? We could have a molecule with 16 connection points, or we could have a DNA fragment that has 16 million, or we could have some sort of cellular thing that has 16 trillion or 16 trillion squared connection points. So the computing environment has to match the world of the data that we're trying to deal with. So it's going to be a challenge in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think in terms being a learning designer, in terms of backwards design a lot. So in order to achieve, the sustainability goals when it comes to research computing and even, whether it be education, whichever side of the fence you fall on, um, we need to start earlier with our students. We can't wait until they're at college or even into their career to begin understanding, data science and data literacy and emerging technologies. The earlier the exposure happens to the foundations of that, because they need to understand what's going on under the hood of those emerging technologies, and that's critical. And we as adults and in our career now, we are kind of we're still learning, and there's some learning so much more, but just the need for continued collaboration is critical to keep the conversation going. Certainly is critical as well to make sure that that divide is not increasing as we adopt all these emerging technologies is critical, whether that be in K-12 or even in the university space. It has great potential. A lot of research is out there around that to, widen that divide. So we need to be concerned about that as well. So yeah, I'll pause there.
Well, the bricks of the future are not the keyboard and chat GP on the screen. The bricks of the future are things we can't imagine right now. And there'll be hardware, there'll be programs, there'll be specialized chips with vision attached to them. We can't imagine what they are, but they're out there, and we need to find a way to support the students and the people that come in with the ideas that they want to do something like that. And let's hope we can help them. You know, when I was a kid, we played pinball with a relay, a mechanical relay going back and forth, and now it's all in electronics. Okay, and so what's it going to be in the future? Well, it's going to be some sort of a brain neuron thing on a chip that we have a biological that we haven't even thought of yet.
And I think that future outlook is a great wrap-up point for us. Thank you, everybody, for the panel today. Thank you for your time, and thank you to participants for coming in and listening to us rant about what we love for an hour and 15. Okay. Y'all have a great day. Great. I'll pass it over again to Henry Neiman for the next few ones.
All right. Thank you, panel, and let's have a giant round of applause. Thank you for a fantastic session. We really appreciate all of your insights and accumulated experience and wisdom. This has been very helpful. I'm going to stop the recording.